So, missed out one species. There's a bird I haven't talked about. So I'm sure everyone's aware of Nagaland and its Amur Falcons, and the name been given to it a bit as Falcon Capital of the World, which really is a very well-deserved title. So this is a part of a small flock of Amur Falcons. So what do you know about the Amur Falcon story? So it's centered on Doyang Reservoir. So we're in see the central west side of Nagaland, as you can see from that map. And the Doyang Reservoir here, it was created in the year 2000 from a hydroelectric project that dammed the Doyang River. So lots of farmland was flooded. That caused quite a lot of issues in the community, but people weren't necessarily adequately compensated for the loss of farming. And a lot more people took to fishing afterwards as their major source of income. So it was the year 2000 that the reservoir, okay, this is Doyang Reservoir as it stands now. And these are the birds we're interested in. So it's interesting that Amur Falcons presumably been passing through this area in quite large numbers for years after years. But it was only really in about 2005, apparently, that locals started to notice huge congregations of Amur Falcons near the Doyang Dam. So they presumably hadn't been occurring there in such large numbers before the dam was created. And in fact, the local names for Amur Falcon, there's a couple of local names. One is Eninum, which is apparently a bird that flies in pairs, which would suggest that they weren't flying in large flocks. They were like this. This is a female on the left and a male on the right. And there's another name given to it, which was Osanvoro, which means foreign bird. So they clearly recognized these birds are not there for very long. They're passing through. But what was noted was that during the day, large numbers of Amur Falcons typically gather on the wires. And then in the evening, they come down to the trees and roost overnight in the trees. And they are roosting in the trees all around the Doyang Reservoir. So it's interesting that speaking to the locals, they apparently weren't hunted until about 2005, 2006, when a few were obviously hunted just through catapults, like slingshots that you see a lot in Nagaland, and people are using that for fun and leisure and catching a few animals and birds for the pot mostly. But people started to recognize there were lots of birds here, and then started using air guns and shooting. And then it was discovered that some of the fishermen, obviously in this area, started deciding to use fishing nets to try and catch them. So they were putting fishing nets high up in the trees here. This is a sort of incredible scene you're seeing in the late afternoon, birds coming low into roost. But so they started hanging up nets. So these are fishing nets strung quite high, and you can see several of the birds that are being caught in the nets here. So it was interesting that I'm saying it's 2005, 2006, they said they were hunting. As Mohit mentioned, it was 2009, I think it was, where this lady from Singapore had apparently commented about birds being hunted in huge numbers here. But it was actually, Amur Falcons are only passing through here for just a few weeks in the year. It's October, late October through November. So it's really only about 6 weeks in a year where the birds are passing through. And so the local fishermen in particular, and people who've lost a lot of income from the flooding of the dam and lost their farmlands, took advantage of what they saw as a great source of income for a short period. So stories were going around about this hunting and about the scale of the migration, which wasn't really studied that well. So Indian ornithologists have known that Amurs come through in large numbers, but not really the quite scale that they were there. So it was in October 2012 when a team, Banu, who Mohit mentioned, Banu Haralu, who's a Naga journalist. She went with a team of people. That's Ramki Srinivasan, who founded Conservation India, Shashank Dalvi, a well-known birdwatcher and researcher, and another local Naga working with Banu is Rokohebi Kwatsu. And the four of them went in October to see what was actually going around and find out what was really going on. And the scale of this hunting is absolutely incredible. In fact, it's unbelievable, really. So they found Amurs, they found 10s, 20s of hunters all going around every day catching Amurs like this. You'll see the numbers that they were stringing up. It really is quite frightening. So you can just imagine what Banu and her team felt when they were first coming across this. Even local kids involved in the trade. So I say trade, it's called quite local. Birds were being caught and sold in the villages. So Punkti village, which is the main one around, very close to the reservoir, was the main one where they were being hunted. And they were being sold locally and into some of the villages around. And they would sell them, they'd sell something like 4 to 6 birds for 100 rupees. So that's £1 for those in the UK. For £1, you could buy 4, 5, 6 Amur Falcons. And they would cook and eat them there or sell them commercially to some of the nearby villages. Really is quite shocking. So the numbers here that they tried to estimate from the numbers of hunters, the number of birds they were seeing, interviews with the locals, they reckon during the peak time of Amur Falcon congregations here, probably up to about 15,000 birds were being killed every single day. In the autumn season, and the main migration season is probably about 6 weeks, there were probably 120, maybe 140,000 Amur Falcons being killed. And it's just, we all know birds of prey. I mean, none of us have seen birds of prey in those sort of numbers. You see any birds of prey, it makes your day. You see a few tens sometimes, or some summer migration, it's incredible. But if you think here, there's 140,000, and those are just the ones that are being killed. How many are actually migrating through here? Anyway, once I think they recovered their senses, they took lots of photos and videos, and Conservation India, the NGO, put together this short video about the Amur Falcon massacre. And this went out, and this attracted enormous attention, international attention. Clearly everyone was shocked, and no one knew even the extent of the migration to the level it was, but this is like hunting on an unprecedented scale. What was pretty remarkable was that there was instant action taken to stop this hunt, and there was an agreement put in between the national government and the local village councils and local NGOs to stop the hunting, which of course wasn't easy because a lot of people had lost their livelihoods, and this brings them good money. So it's all very well to say you've got to stop. These people are traditional hunters. It's always been part of their tradition. The only difference here, I suppose, was that the Amur hunting was new. They took advantage of an opportunity, really. But it was dramatic. So by the next year, there was no hunting at all in this area. Many of the hunters there, fishermen and falcon hunters, were now becoming conservationists. They're guarding falcons, guarding the roosting site during passage periods, and getting paid some amount of money for this. So there's a local NGO, the Nagaland Wildlife and Biodiversity Conservation Trust in Punkti village, set up a big outreach program and education program for children in various villages around here called Friends of the Amur Falcon. And it's drastic what the work they've done and the education they've done. So they set up a few watchtowers. So this is the sort of place we went to in 2016. Just stand up here for hours watching falcons and dawn roosting in these trees and then flying in and out, and then the most spectacular gathering of falcons at dusk you can really imagine. So the Friends of the Amur Falcon did lots of education. So there's posters put up everywhere. A lot of work in schools talking about the Amurs and the story of the Amurs, because it has the most fantastic migration. So the story, when you explain to people who just didn't really know much about this, and I'll talk a little bit more about the migration itself coming on. But one of the things they did, this is Banu herself talking to some of the kids there. So we're talking to the kids and the hunters as well. And one of the things that was, this is actually, they're singing the song that they wrote, the Amur Falcons song. And there's a falcon passport issued to the kids in school around here. Now, the interesting thing on this falcon passport, issued by the Ministry of Falcons, you'll notice it says the governments of Asia and Africa. So this is what part of the story they were trying to show was that it's incredible, the story of these birds wintering in South Africa, as we'll talk about in a little bit. But also one point to make, I think, was that these birds perform a useful purpose. So they're insectivores. So the reason they are in Nagaland this time of year was mostly to feed on termites, as winged termites were emerging. And there are millions and millions of termites, and that's what these birds are staging for and fattening up before their migration onto Africa. So part of the education really was to explain, this is a farming community, what job these birds were doing, and also in explaining that by hunting these birds here, farmers in Africa are suffering. They haven't got the falcons there, they haven't got the pest control there, so their crops are failing because of this. So finding that something in common, I think, was a big part of their education here. So this is some little notebooks the kids were getting to record their observations of falcons. And there was a lot more done here on other wildlife as well. So drawing butterflies in this case, and generally getting incredible interest in their local environment. It's absolutely clear you have to get through to the children for this sort of thing. So then they're out moth trapping in the evenings. So the Chief Minister of Nagaland paid a visit in the following year. This was 2013, the first year of no hunting. And here are some of the friends of the Amur Falcon. So obviously this work was helping, but the big problem here is really that people have lost their livelihoods, and there has to be money coming into them to really make this worthwhile. So it was estimated, I think, that hunting in birds in the area was bringing in the villages 3.5 million rupees a year, about £35,000, which clearly goes a long way in some of these small villages. So there's been attempts to increase ecotourism a little bit. There's quite a few homestays set up in the area, but it's difficult to, you don't want to do it on a mass scale. It's got to be very small. It's not an area that can cope with hotels and resorts springing up. So all the work has been focused really on just developing community tourism and homestays and ecotourism. It's not necessarily been organized that well enough. It's not benefiting the entire community, but something's happening. And everyone should go and visit at some stage and do their bit. So also, when this migration, to understand this migration a little bit more, in the first year after this, there were some birds that were caught and tagged. So these, in fact, the bird on the right is one of the first birds that was tagged in 2013 in the autumn. This is Naga. The bird was named Naga. There were 3 birds in that first autumn fitted with satellite tags and released to try and track them. It's really quite fascinating to find out the routes that these birds are doing. So this is the first 3 birds that were tagged in that first year. So you can see the green at the top in China and just into Siberia is the breeding ground for Amurs. And they're going right down into southern Africa, so sort of eastern South Africa typically. It's the longest migration of any raptor, I believe. As I mentioned, the staging, they're eating termites majorly, so that's why they stop over. So typically you're about 6 weeks. I don't know how long individual birds stop and stage for, but then after they've fattened up on termites, they probably double their body weight in termites, and they leave Nagaland. They're then flying across central India and right across the Arabian Sea. So it's an incredible overwater journey, which has to be done non-stop. So Naga himself, the first bird tagged, was tracked to do that journey from Nagaland across the rest of India to Somalia, where they landed in Africa, 5,600 kilometers in just over 5 days of non-stop flying. It really is just a phenomenal migration route. And that's less than half of their one single trip journey, of course. They're then typically staging in East Africa. So the satellites, tracking would say that they actually stopped for a while in Somalia. East Tsavo National Park, Tsavo East, rather, is a well-known place where they'd stage there, and then go further down into Southern Africa. So January to March, they're really in Southern Africa. So interesting, of course, that's their summer. So these birds are getting the longest days. They're migrating to get the longest possible day length in Southern Africa. They're leaving there and coming back up through April, May into India, getting back onto their breeding grounds for sort of June, July, August, September, which is the longest day length in the north. So they've got the longest time available to feed on various insects. This is a more recent bird that was tracked. This bird was called Long Leng, after another roost site in Nagaland, in a slightly different area. And what's interesting about this particular bird is that it's been tracked doing this round trip at least 4 times from the breeding grounds into India. Interestingly, going straight across the Arabian Sea. I think the white lines are their autumn route, and then the yellows are coming back in the spring. So slightly different route in the spring. And for those of you who are in Mumbai, early May, you can see Amur Falcon coming in. They're coming in over Gujarat and Mumbai. I was lucky enough to see Amur Falcon a few years ago before we knew anything about this in Mumbai, in I think first week of May. Interestingly, this bird then has gone down into southern India before going along the east coast and back up into Southeast Asia and up through China back to the breeding grounds. So this is a round trip that's more than 20,000 kilometers. So, and this particular bird, as I say, has done it 4 times. It's done more than 80,000 kilometers in the last 4 years. So it really is an incredible migration. So it's an incredible migration, but the staging in Nagaland is almost even more incredible. The numbers are, well, they're uncountable. They're like swarms of bees or something when you watch them. I tried to count when I was there, and I kept on trying to count, getting to like sort of 50,000, 80,000, maybe 100,000, but struggling. So just before they're roosting and they're all flying around when it's getting quite dark and they're all over the place, and the noise is incredible. But I think the best estimate from a team that went a few years ago was actually that even on a one-day community roost, there was 1 million falcons. So I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen more than 100,000 of any single bird, but to think that they're falcons like that is really incredible. But there's also other sites in the northeast that are apparently having staging in large numbers as well. So we've started tracking the birds from Manipur. And interestingly enough, one of the birds tracked in Manipur recently, well, it was caught, satellite tag fitted, and then 2 days later, not very far away in Manipur, it was shot by a hunter. But actually, with hindsight, that probably worked quite well because it attracted quite a lot of local media attention and has helped reduce hunting in that area. So there's various places probably where Amurs are in these large numbers. Whether that's birds dispersing from Doyang and maybe there aren't as many there as possible, or whether there've always been large numbers elsewhere, isn't really quite known. Maybe the disturbance at Doyang has been too much and they've started moving around a bit. But it really is one of the bird spectacles of the world. It could be up there in the top 10 bird spectacles of the world, I have no doubt. I think it's probably the day I spent just looking at Amur Falcons was one of the most memorable birding days in my life. And it's the sort of thing where if you're a birder, you have to go at some stage in your lifetime because you'd regret not going. It is that spectacular. Just thought I'd mention that if this has not been enough for you, because there's a lot more to it, there's a few videos which are super that explain the story of the Amur Falcon. And the original one that went viral that raised awareness of the problem in the first place. The Race to Save the Amur Falcon was a film put together for about 20 minutes explaining the whole story that I've just summarized briefly, but you should definitely watch that, because one thing I haven't shown here, of course, is video of flocks of tens of thousands or 100,000 of birds calling away, which is spectacular. The BBC, narrated by David Attenborough, did a short, just a 3-minute film on Amur Falcons, one at the bottom left there, which was about their feeding. So watching them feeding on termites in Nagaland, a super watch. And if you're interested in Nagaland in more general, there's this fantastic webinar done a few months ago by Pia Sethi, who's an ecologist who's done a lot of working with the Naga communities, and a lot of fantastic stories about the tribes and the culture and the conservation side and the ecotourism side. So I'd urge you to try and watch some of those if you can. We can put the links in the chat as well. But it's an incredible story. Now, I need to thank especially Conservation India, Ramki at Conservation India, who gave me loads of information. So loads of the photos and stories, and you can find lots of information on their website. And it's been superb. And Conservation India and the original team were instrumental in getting this work done. But then the local NGOs have been super. So there's been various other organisations involved as well who are doing some fantastic work, and will continue to do so, I'm sure. And also, I actually need to thank, for a change this week, I have to thank my daughter Tia, who has just finished school and decided she was going to look into Naga tribes, and so she helped me with most of the research on Naga tribes today. So thank you, Tia, and thank you everybody else.